If you look at the overall news of everything, Israel is not covered as much as I thought it would be. I agree, compared to other regions in the world. Of course, yes, it is more covered because the situation is interesting to a lot of people. And also another thing that we have to remember, because there are a lot of reporters in Israel, or a lot of reporters that deal with Israel. Whereas if you look at places like Iran, North Korea, places where you don't really have the media, you're also not going to have reporters from American outlets there. And that's also part of the reason. It contributes to the fact that maybe we don't hear as much about them, unfortunately.
Okay, so then let me ask the question. We often talk about the news being skewed, but if there's so many reporters on the ground, why does it still come out skewed?
Okay, so first of all, it's true. We have the reporters on the ground. And I have to tell you, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as I can speak on behalf of them because I was there, they work with them a lot. We give briefings, we do interviews. The ministry organizes with them a lot of tours, which means we'll take them, for example, to the border and we'll show them what's going on, the border with Gaza I'm talking about. But we also take them to the border with Syria and we'll show them the different operations that Israel does there. So we do brief them, we do the interviews. I do the same here with the media outlets I work with. A lot of times I'll do briefings where I'll tell journalists, I'll give them information. And I think that one of the changes that we maybe have to do is to try and find maybe different stories. So for example, why not interview the family that lives in Sderot, half a mile from the border with Gaza, and talk to them about their everyday life? Because what you see in the news is reality for Israelis every day in the south. Why not interview a family or a farmer whose fields were burned because of the kites that came from Gaza? Those kind of things. Why not interview, for example, in the north, the Israeli doctors and tell their stories, how they help Syrian refugees that are in Israeli hospitals? So I think we need to sometimes appeal a little bit more to emotions. That would be probably part of it. In the news business, there's a saying, right? And it says, if it bleeds, it leads. What the media is doing is looking for sensational stories. Humanitarian aid that goes from Israel into Gaza every day. Okay, you were talking about a reporter that's on the ground. It happens every day. It's not a story. What's a story? Humanitarian aid is going in and helping? That's not a story, right? But Palestinians that die on the border, that's a story because it's visual, because it's a sensation, because it appeals to emotions, and that's the issue that we have. So you could cover the good stories and tell how amazing the startup nation is, but the media also likes to deal with things that actually drive people and sell papers, and it's the way the media works everywhere in the world, I think, not only in the US.
Talk to me about context. I think many of us have the experience when we read an article that there's nothing wrong factually with the article or the presentation on television, but there's more to the story. There's much more to the story. And how come they're not presenting more? Is it because of a bias? Is it because of we live in a world of 140 characters or 280 characters and we can't go further? What is it?
I agree there's a really big problem of context, and that is also part of my job, to point out the context. And for example, one thing that I'm trying to do now is give them the information in advance. The problem is, as you said, we also live in, first of all, we live in a 140 character world where you have to do everything short. Second, and that's also something one of the reporters was telling me, there's an overflow of information. There's too much information. You have to think reporters in different outlets, New York Times or Wall Street Journal or BuzzFeed or wherever they sit, they get millions of emails every day, stories that are being pitched to them every day. They have to choose what to write, how to write. Everything has to be quick. You don't have time. You work on a story half an hour, something else is more important. The US Embassy move, right? The violence in Gaza. We had 40,000 rioters from 13 different locations trying to breach the border. Obviously, not obviously, unfortunately, there were casualties as it happens, even though I have to say the Israeli army reached out, whether it was through social media or dropping leaflets. And I don't know if you saw, but 1 day or 2 days after, Hamas admitted that 52 out of the 62 members were actually from the military wing of Hamas. 52 of the victims, and the rest were Palestinian Islamic Jihad, right? So of course I sent that information out as soon as I got it, because you work quick to reporters, but it's not interesting anymore because something else happened, because you're not going to go and check and correct, and also it's the American media, they're busy with national domestic news.
It often seems that there's an equation here that's very difficult to manage, where you have seemingly a very simple human rights issue up against a response that's often something to the effect of, well, it's complicated, or it's nuanced, and there's a lot more explanation, and we need to do an investigation first, and by the time we do an investigation, nobody cares about it. So you have a lopsided equation of a very simplistic statement of racism or human rights or civil rights versus nuance and complication. Tell us how you manage that.
I have to point out the complexity. I have to give context. There's nothing I can do, The situation is complex. Life is not black and white. Everything is complex, and also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and everything that is going on in Israel, it is complex and it needs context.
I think Israel's enemies take advantage of that.
In what sense?
They present a very simplistic message because they know that Israel's going to come back with something too complex for the media to grapple with.
But that's where social media is a really good tool. So if we're talking about 140 characters, as you mentioned before, something, for example, I'll give you an example. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs opened a Facebook page, and I encourage you to follow it. It's called Israel in Arabic. We have a Facebook page as well as a Twitter handle. And what they do is there's a department of Arabic speakers, and they reach out to the Arab world. We have 1.6 million followers from the Arab world, really from Iraq to Algeria, and people comment on stuff and they answer them, and really it goes the website from things like the embassy move and the conflict and what's going on in Israel to how do you make shakshuka. Really, this is the things that we post, and it's amazing. It's amazing how people react to it, and social media is really a great tool when it comes to it. And by the way, if we're already talking about social media, it's not related right now to Israel, but the protests in Iran today, I don't know how many of you saw, but there's crazy protests going on in Iran today on the streets. It wasn't covered that much in the news. Again, why? I asked reporters, why are you not covering it? And they tell me, Almog, there are no reporters in Iran, what can we do? The media is not exactly free. But how do we know about it? Because of social media. And I don't know if you saw, but what people were chanting on the streets today is not death to Israel or death to America. They were actually chanting death to Gaza. Where's our money? Our money is in Syria, our money is in Gaza. So the only reason we know about this is because of social media.
Talk to me about the double standard argument. I think many of us make that argument. We say, look what's going on in a place like Syria, yet you pay so little attention to those murders, and the situation in Israel is nothing in comparison. Why do you pay so much attention to Israel? How does that go over, the double standard argument?
I think it's a bit of a tricky question, because I really believe that as Jews and as Israelis, we should uphold ourselves to, a certain standard. But it doesn't mean that we need to be targeted as much. Now, I don't cover the UN. We have the Israeli mission to the UN who cover them. But I think you all know about the US decision to leave the United Nations Human Rights Council, which Israel supports and welcomed. And generally, we see a bit of a change in the United Nations, finally, because there's no reason that Israel should be targeted in this way. And, just to give you a small example, between 2012 and 2015, there were 97 resolutions adopted against countries. 97. 86 of them were against Israel. So when we're talking about double standards, again, we should Israel should uphold themselves to a certain standard. I don't think it's right for us as Jews and Israelis to compare ourselves, that's my personal opinion, to Syria or North Korea or Iran or any of those regimes. We are a vibrant, successful democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, but it doesn't mean that we need to be targeted in such a way.
So in terms of social media, you know, those who know me, I push social media a lot. I feel that we have a room here full of advocates. I mean, these are people who, generally the profile of people involved with AJC are people who are thoughtful about Jewish issues and want to be active on those issues. And I often say the best way for people to be advocates, the easiest way, is for them to be active on social media. Can I have a show of hands how many people are active on social media in this room?
Very good.
So, very good, but only about half. Okay. I want to hear from an expert about being active on social media as a way to be an Israel advocate.
Tweet a lot. Tweet a lot. Tag people. Tag them in the pictures. Try to have a conversation. Ask questions. Don't just write a statement. Try to engage. You ask a question, people respond. Retweet. When you retweet, other people will retweet you back afterwards. Quote, retweet. Do those things. Follow people. It's important. That's really, and I agree with you, Scott, it's one of the best ways to get your message out. You were talking before about how we say everything is complex. Sometimes one picture is enough. Really, it's enough. And I'm going to give you another example. I don't know how many of you heard, but for the 70 celebration, the 70th anniversary of Israel, we did an event at Times Square. It was the Ministry of Culture together with the Israeli consulate in New York. It was an amazing, massive event that we held. And, you know, obviously there was security and people went in and we had a consul general talking and music and Shiri Maimon, who's an Israeli superstar who, by the way, is now on Broadway. You should all go. She's playing in Chicago from September. So we all were there, and then I took this picture, and I swear I didn't do it on purpose. I just looked through my photos after, and I saw in one picture diverse Israel. Really, I saw in the middle of Times Square, next to the stage, an African American, a Muslim, an LGBT, and it was like all in the same picture, just next to the stage. And I just posted it on social media, and I wrote something like, "This is Israel." And that speaks for itself. So like you said before, you don't always have to make things complex and say, you know, oh, we're a diverse society. No, the picture speaks for itself. You see this. And those are people that came to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel. So one picture is sometimes enough.
I have one last question for you. I want to hear a little bit about you. You're a millennial. You're clearly talented. This is your first post. You could be doing whatever you want, it seems to me. Why are you spending your days fighting for Israel?
So I'm actually half Israeli. I'm half Austrian. I grew up in Vienna. My dad's Austrian Jewish. My mom's Israeli. They met in the military and moved to Austria. And I grew up in Vienna as an Austrian Jew. So maybe like you, I know what it's like to be a Jew in the diaspora. I was first to join the diaspora before I saw myself as an Israeli. I moved to Israel when I was about 13. And, you know, I went to the army. I went to an intelligence unit in the army. And I think my whole life, that's what I did. I represented Israel wherever I went, because after the army I traveled, as many Israelis do. Normally we travel for 1 or 2 years. I somehow traveled for 8 years. Went around the world and decided to live in random places such as New Zealand and Singapore and Australia, where I ended up. And, you know, it was amazing because when you find yourself in New Zealand, for example, and you live with a German housemate and a Maori housemate, you know, from the indigenous tribe, and you try to explain them Israel, it's an amazing experience. Or try it in Singapore with an Asian person, you know, you have to speak to their values. So every country I went to, by the way, same in Australia, I had also Aboriginal friends, and you know, you have to understand the place, you have to understand where you're at, and that's something I'm trying to do in the US right now too, because I still need to study. I've been here since September, and You know, I thought I came here, I'll come here and it will be like in Austria. Oh yeah, the Jewish community. And then you come to New York and you realize there's so many different streams and communities, and it's not one big community. So I'm definitely trying to, that's why I travel a lot, to study the different places, different opinions. And, you know, I think we really see you as an extension, American Jews as an extension of Israel, and generally Jews in the world. And your support is important. It is really, really important, and it affects Israelis every day. It does. But part of my job is not only to study and bring here the news and the policies, it's also to listen to what you have to say and bring it back to the government and let them know how you feel about different issues. So that's also something that I'm trying to do a lot. So, and actually David Harris said once, I was at a meeting with him and he said something that I like. I kind of stole his line. He said, I'm sometimes on a listening tour, not so much on a speaking tour. So right now I spoke a lot, but we can make this also a listening tour if there's anything you wanted to share with me.
If you can keep it to a question and not comments, I would really appreciate it.
Or maybe not.
This man is a psychoanalyst. He's on a psychoanalyst listserv, and he is concerned about negative discussion on the listserv about Israel, all tied to a conference that's taking place next June in Tel Aviv.
Okay, so you want to know what to do basically when people criticize Israel, and how do you respond? First of all, let them speak. Listen. Listen to their opinion. Listen to what they have to say. You don't always have to go into defense. It's okay to let them speak, and it's okay to tell them it's fine. You can have your opinion, but now that I listen to you, let me share my opinion about Israel and about how I feel about it. I think that's the right way to go in it. So first, you know, calm down the person and try to give them the feeling, really, maybe it sounds, I'm not sure if it sounds obvious what I say, but I feel with a lot of people it's always like, no, you're wrong, Israel is this and Israel is that. No, it's okay. And then tell them, you know what? Israel's not perfect. It's a diverse society. It's not perfect. We have issues. Same as the US, same as many countries, right? We all have different problems. So try to really come from that more relaxed approach, and try to really connect to their values, to what they're feeling and how they're feeling. And by the way, I think that one of the best ways to really know Israel is to experience Israel, because there's no substitute. I can sit and talk in a room for hours. You can try and, you know, sit and try and convince your friends. And the only way is to go to Israel. And I'm going to give you one little story that I had. When I was at headquarters, we had a delegation of journalists from Indonesia. Now, Israel and Indonesia don't have diplomatic relations. We did a special permit, a special visa, to let those Indonesian journalists come into Israel, Muslims obviously, and you know, feel and experience Israel for themselves. I don't need to tell you, they were amazed and shocked by everything. The people, the warmth, the food, that it's not at all what they grew up on. But one of the most amazing experiences we had was, we were in Israel, in Jerusalem. And one of the journalists wanted to go and pray in the mosque. And then the Waqf, which are Jordanians and Muslims themselves, told him, no, you can't pray here because you're an official guest by the state of Israel. So he was prevented by one of his own, by another Muslim, to go and pray in a mosque just because, in Jerusalem, because he's an official guest of the state of Israel. And he couldn't believe it. And you know, from that point on, I didn't have to do anything, really. Like, my job was easy. Because he couldn't get over the fact, really, the whole trip, that another Muslim denied his right to pray in Jerusalem. Of course, the delegation went back. Our hope in Israel is always that people will write about their experiences. I don't need to tell you, maybe one article came out. I asked them, are you going to go back to Indonesia and write about that? And they were like, oh, look, you know, it's an amazing trip, but there's a certain narrative, and my outlet and my editor or my publisher are not going to approve this, and blah, 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 blah. But they tell their families, they tell their friends. So really try and keep doing that. Those programs, they're amazing. They work because they experience situations in Israel that show you what the real Israel is.
Certainly AJC's Global Forum did that, and we brought Pak Yahya, who is the head of the largest Muslim organization in the world with 50 million Muslims, from Indonesia. Amazing. And he met with Prime Minister Netanyahu at great risk to himself. Next.
As you know, our next policy leaders are all on the college campuses. And for my kids and for many people who have children at young adults at the college campuses, there is such an anti-Semitic and anti-Israel onslaught. So my question to you is, how can all of us and how can you have a more sustained informational campaign, giving these young people the words to respond and the way to respond, and not just to the Jews on campus, to try to change the narrative that everyone is this misinformation that's going on there about what's going on in the Middle East.
How can we help the students on
Yes.
campus to get the message across to their fellow students, Jews and non-Jews?
Okay, so first of all, and I really mean this from the bottom of my heart, the Israeli consulate in New York is here to help. We have a department, my colleague Consul Galit Peleg, who's responsible for public relations of in the consulate. We call public diplomacy. She also has an academic department. They deal with universities. So also with me, whenever you need information, points on how to talk, how to convince people, what to tell them, really ask me, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to email you things. Another way to approach this, and that's also to the question before, is, you know, when people start with the whole boycotting thing and against Israel or whatever, try to tell them, really take those energies. If you have so much energy to boycott someone, take this energy and invest it, you know, channel this energy into a good project. Why boycott? How does boycotting contribute to peace? Take this energy and go to a coexistence project. Develop some project that brings, you know, Jews and Muslims together, Israeli and Arabs. If you really think there's a problem, then fix it by taking it into a good direction, not in a bad direction. It's something that I do, especially with liberals and youngs, I tell them a lot about coexistence projects in Israel, things that we tried to do. You can Google it, you can look online, there are millions of groups in Israel, beautiful projects, really beautiful projects that work on that. And also to give you just a little quick story, in my cadets course in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we had the first Israeli Muslim diplomat, which is amazing, an amazing, amazing achievement. She's originally from a place called Baka El Garbia in Israel, which I don't know how many of you know, but can be sometimes a little bit hostile. And she went into the cadets course. I don't think she got the full acceptance at the beginning from her family and her circle. And she's now a diplomat, and she's an Israeli woman and diplomat that serves in Ankara, Turkey, which is amazing. And one more thing I wanted to tell you, talking about also double standards before. I saw on Twitter the other day, I don't remember who tweeted it, but it was some progressive liberal group, and they were holding this sign saying, you know, queers for Palestine. And someone, you know, someone wrote, and I think I retweeted it too, and I wanted to say, I dare you to hold this sign in Gaza. Really, I dare you, talking about human rights, to hold this sign up in Gaza. So people that talk about human rights, look up a little bit about the human rights in Gaza and what's going on there and how you get arrested for things that seem obvious to us. Another example that I can give you, there's something in Israel called the Open House. I don't know how many of you have heard about it, but thinking now about the Pride Parade that we had in New York, the Open House hosts LGBTs that don't feel comfortable or have issues, and it's basically a community that supports each other. They open now an Arab chapter in Jerusalem. So you have LGBTs that flee from Gaza or the West Bank or other places and basically come to Jerusalem. A lot of them go and live in Tel Aviv because they know that's where they have their freedom. So there's a million examples really that I can give you, but try to find those good things and try to show them it works.
So how can you tell what's real and what's not real, especially when you see a similar story on two different media outlets that's not presented the same way?
So young and such a deep question. How can you tell what's real? No, it's a good question. It's a great question. And I think the answer is you can't. Really, you can't. You don't know. You don't know because, as I mentioned before, again, people think, and that's what sometimes bothers me, oh, this outlet writes, they read an article from a certain outlet and then they say, this outlet is against Israel. you never know. Again, maybe they didn't have the reporters, maybe it's someone specific who has an opinion, maybe the editor changed it, maybe this, maybe that. There's so many reasons behind it. And that's why I think you should really, it goes back to what I said before, read a lot. If you don't have time, read a little bit from everything. That's really the only way to get the information, because in the end it's a puzzle, right? So I know people tend to sometimes not trust everything they read, but try to make your own opinion. I'm sure we're all intelligent, mature people, and try to read everything. Really, I encourage you to also follow those outlets that you normally wouldn't.
How does one respond to an accusation of racism against Israel? And also, let's say, an accusation that you must be arch-conservative if you are in favor of Israel.
So to the second one, again, you don't need to be pro-Israel or anti-Israel. I don't know why people think it has to be black and white. It doesn't. I can tell you in Israel, shishi or Shabbat dinner with my friend means we sit around the table and we argue, because that's what Jews do, right? We just argue about everything all the time. And there's no conclusion, really. One thinks this guy's great, but his policy is bad, and the other guy's good, but his policy is like that. So it's okay, it's argue, have a conversation, it's fine. You don't need to make a decision. You can love Israel and think that one policy is great and the other policy is not that good and needs to be, improved. It's fine. I sometimes feel here, I'm not going to comment on Israel and American domestic politics, but it became in a way very partisan. And you can feel it. People think it's this way or that way. No, there's a middle ground. It's okay to have mixed opinion. To the whole claim of racism, again, you can give that example I just gave of an Israeli Muslim diplomat representing the country. We have Israeli Druze who are representing the countries. There's so many examples I can give you. Israeli Arabs, they don't have to serve in the army. We have 5,000 Israeli Arabs serving in the IDF. That's just to give you one example. So, when it comes to diversity, I think Israel is the first place. Plus, if you compare us to other countries in the Middle East, again, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And there's racism. We talked now about Gaza and what riots there over there. There's a lot of examples you can give, but you have to, you have to inform yourself. You have to research and Google and look it up and find those examples, because examples work, really. Examples and visuals, that's what works.
Many thanks to Consul Almog Elijah.
Thank you so much.
Both for being with us tonight and really being on the front lines of this battle.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.